Well, I think we should kick this off, Doug. Hey, everybody, welcome to the Chorus Weekly Briefing. Jim Benton, CEO at Chorus. Today, we're talking about storytelling and how we've seen that winning sales teams tell more stories, and specifically top performers tell 20% more stories than the average performer. I'm joined today by Doug Landis, growth partner at Emergence Capital, Google, Salesforce, Box, just absolute stunning in terms of sales productivity and driving teams. Doug, how are we feeling today?
Awesome. Happy
Really
almost Halloween.
Yeah. Oh, geez. Are we celebrating holidays anymore?
We are. Of course we are. I'm in the spirit here with my mug.
My mug doesn't quite do it, but I think the kids' costumes arrived yesterday, and
Nice.
it's starting to feel like the holiday season again.
Gotta stay true to form.
I like it. Doug, I woke up this morning at 6:15 is when my new Apple Sleep app is programmed for, which I haven't figured out. All the alarm bells were going off as I tried to snooze. And I thought for this episode today, we could try to tell stories as much as possible. I don't know if we're going to nail this thing, but we'll try to use stories. And so I thought maybe a great starting story is, how the heck does somebody become known as a chief storyteller?
Well, outside of, most of my friends would probably say maybe I was the chief bullshit artist a long time ago. But the reality is actually started when I was at Box. One of the interesting things that I noticed, so about 6 years ago, we had hired a new CRO. CRO comes in typical fashion, he wants to meet with the sales organization. So I'm probably sure you had a similar experience. He walks around the floor and he's like, hey, tell me about how you position or articulate the value of Box. And what he heard was 20 or 30 different stories. And that three things came to mind. Number one, it's not necessarily bad if you hear 30 iterations of your own story, but the challenge was there wasn't a clear point to the stories. They were all over the place. And so that was one learning. Second learning was everyone was trying to tell somebody else's story, in this case, Aaron's version of the Box story. Yep. And you got to be really careful about that. When you're trying to tell somebody else's story, it's hard to actually do and to make it sound sincere and authentic, which is critical to telling stories. And then the third thing was, I realized this was incredibly self-serving. It was all about us. And so I went and I actually pitched this idea to Aaron. I'm like, we need to change our whole narrative and change the way we talk about who we are. And I'm going to do that. And I'm going to call myself the chief storyteller. And he was like, okay, great. And so what we did was we flipped the script. Like we literally flipped the script. And it worked. And here's a little takeaway and sorry to interrupt, but the takeaway was, when we started infusing more of the voice of our customer, when we were really clear about the point that we were trying to tell in every single story, and when we taught everybody how to make the story their own, it made it easier for the reps to remember and be able to articulate in a more natural, authentic way. Also made it easier for our customers and our prospects to really connect with who we were and the value that we thought we were delivering to our customers.
You mentioned that everybody was telling Aaron's story, which I could only imagine. What a fun CEO, fun leader, watching him all those years. What was your story? So when you talked about everyone having a story, in your early days, what was the Doug Landis version of Box? How did you tell it?
I try and simplify things, I guess. And the way I looked at Box is, I looked at we were in the business of trying to make information easily accessible to anybody at any point in time. And the reason why that mattered is, I look at this woman named Sue that I knew, who was a mid-level marketing manager for Coca-Cola, who was divorced with 2 kids. And anytime her child was actually sick, she actually had to call in and take the day off of work because she couldn't get her work done at home. Yeah. And one of the things that I realized after talking to her was, just because she started using the product like Box, she was actually able to take her work home in a safe and secure manner and still get what she needed to do done while taking care of her family, no longer having to take days off of work. So it literally changed her life, And to me, that's what I mean by getting access to information anytime, anywhere. And that was our view of the world.
Well, I love it because it's authentic. It's like you can feel it when you tell that story. One of the data points I wanted to get your perspective on, and the Sue story has a little bit of social proof. It's a little bit different, but we find that top performers include concrete social proof in about 68% of their stories. And that's up from 29% of kind of our average performers. So social proof is what our top performers are using. And this is when they're giving examples, how other people have done it, how they've achieved these different values. what's your take on the social proof side of things?
It's massive.
What's a story, Doug? I got to keep us going on stories here on social proof.
So let's talk about social proof. I personally think that social proof is, I define social proof as customer stories, right? You're using examples of how some of the other customers who are similar to you were in a similar situation. And then guess what? They started using our platform and they realized some value, right? And it's interesting because if you think about the construct of social proof, really what you're trying to do is showcase and highlight the contrast, which contrast is a critical element to telling stories because it creates space for emotion to exist. Contrast is like, where they were to where they are now, or, what is to what could be, or what could be, what was to what is. To me, that's like crucial in helping people to understand that there was a journey, because storytelling is all about a journey. Just like, this whole webinar, we're trying to take everybody on a journey through this webinar. It's hard to do if you're not consciously mindful of it. And I think that statistic, what that tells me is the best salespeople are more consciously aware of the stories that they tell, when to tell those stories, how to tell those stories, and they know how to infuse them throughout every single conversation. That's my translation of that statistic.
I'm trying to think of stories on the fly here as you're talking. The one that comes to mind, which these are unprompted.
Yes.
But early in my career of being in sales tech, we had an opening slide that said, this is like crack for sales reps. And this is back in the 2012 era. And it was from Wall Street Journal. And the story was that, we were just about, do we make this thing a go? Do we not make it go? You got that ulcer in your stomach and you get a phone call and someone says, I have to have this piece of software. I just got a job at Wall Street Journal. I'm starting in 2 weeks, calling you. It is, early days. And poof, they do it. And they come back and say, this is the, like crack for sales reps. The key was the story. Like it wasn't the words, it was knowing who said it and why they said it. And, you're right. Having that authenticity is what matters.
And also knowing what it meant, right? So this is like crack for sales reps. By the way, you could craft 20 different stories off of that hook. I call that a hook. Which also, by the way, you have to be careful because I think maybe in 2012 there was a crack epidemic, but whatever.
They don't use that one anymore.
You always have to be really careful. I always like to say
back then.
It's like when people say like, these people drank the Kool-Aid. It's like, oh, that's a terrible analogy. By the way, what we're getting at here is another very important tool in telling stories, which is analogies and metaphors. Right? Analogies and metaphors to make complex ideas. In the world of tech sales, we have really complex products. And unfortunately, we tend to drink too much of our own champagne and we use our own language and our own words. Yeah. And guess what? 90% of your customers and prospects have no idea what you're saying. They don't know how to translate it. It's like when you travel to a foreign country and you're like, I'm lost. You're trying to get on the train to go make it to a wine tasting. This just happened to me in Bordeaux over Christmas. And we couldn't get on the train because I couldn't figure out in French how to actually buy a ticket. But that was a bit of a little diatribe there. But the point is
trying to get the story in.
Using analogies and metaphors actually can help take these complex ideas and make them more simple and easily understood.
I was on a call yesterday with the CRO that had been booked a week before, and I was thinking about how do I get ready for it and talk through it. And what was interesting was just the ability to relive all of the stories that had led to that call. And I think when we talk about stories and top performers telling more, I was putting myself in those shoes of I'm in it. How do I tell those stories? And I've always thought the key to the story is you got to be in it, or you need to be able to see it in 3D, fully experience someone else's story. So I'm watching all the recordings, from the very first interaction this customer had with our team and when they said the issues were. But I found that I was able to, for the most part, bring that to this, 15-minute dialogue versus just telling someone, what we do and why it's, why it matters. So the key is, how do we get sales performers, sales professionals to build a library of stories faster, to get these, versus taking 6 months?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I would ask marketing and customer success to help, because they both have access to information that will make building out this story library really, really easy. I also think that salespeople need to know what story they're going to tell at every stage of the sales process, and what story you're going to align to which buyer persona you're speaking to. right? Because the story needs to be relevant to the audience, right?
Yep.
The story needs to have a character or characters in the story itself. So you need to be a little bit more thoughtful about what you're going to tell and to whom, because it has to be relevant, because the character and the point of the story that you're telling needs to really resonate with that audience in particular. But by the way, if you map it out, you'll realize, especially using a platform like Chorus, I can go grab all these stories that I've heard across the organization and drop them into this matrix. And next thing you know, I know what to say when, in which situation, in which environment. I think that's one of the challenges. Part of the reason why we don't tell enough stories is it's twofold. Number one, most people haven't really thought through about what the point of the story that they're trying to tell, which is like when someone puts you on the spot, kind of like what you're doing, Jim, is, put someone on the spot and all of a sudden it's like, oh, I got to come up with a story. And most often we don't know what the point is. And so we ramble. And then secondly is like, we just don't understand when and how to use them. And it's muscle memory that we actually need to train and work on.
It's interesting when you have to think on the fly on these stories. But one of the other areas one of the data points that we were looking at is, from an executive standpoint, we're finding that the executive buyer is wanting to hear more stories. And we know that during this kind of pandemic and work from home and the era we're in right now, we're seeing a significant increase, almost a 2x increase in execs joining sales calls. So now the data says we better be ready to go tell stories.
Yep.
So 16% increase in social proof stories used when execs are on. What do you think execs want to hear? What are the stories they want to hear?
So execs want to hear stories about their peers, their competitors, and how they're winning in their environment, or how you may be helping their peers or competitors. They want to hear about, how you're helping them to align to their strategic priorities. They don't want to necessarily hear about, your favorite cooking shows.
Well, I thought no better than to have one of our great sales leaders, Devin Liu, join us, who just popped in here.
What's up, Devin?
Hey, Doug.
Devin, what's your story when it comes to execs? Tell us a story.
All right, let me give you a story about storytelling. First, wanted to say I'm honored to be a part of this. Doug has played a big role in how we tell stories here at Chorus and the impact it really drives in an evaluation. So it's a big piece of my sales process. When you think about a presentation and what you're ultimately doing, it's not helping them understand all the features that you have, but really helping them understand how and why they would use it and really the impact. And there's no better way than doing that with somebody who's similar to them, somebody who's actually using it in their practical role. So let me tell you a little story about a deal that I had earlier this year with some executives. It was deep into the evaluation process. We were the second vendor and they had a compelling timeline, and really we only had one shot with their executive team to be able to get into this evaluation. So instead of just leading with all the differentiators that we had and the features that we had that our competitor didn't have, we actually had the chance to really shape the evaluation criteria. It was their first time leveraging technology like this. They were thinking, hey, okay, what features are really going to align to the big problems that we're going to solve? And that's ultimately how I used customer storytelling there. I really focused on the key parts and their key problems, and ultimately trying to put them in a seat. So going back to this, when I was using customer storytelling throughout the demo and presentation, it was really focused on their biggest problems. And instead of helping them conceptually saying, hey, you could use it like this, you could think about using it like that, I gave them relevant examples of how people just like them were using it and the impact that they had.
There you go.
Devin, if we put you on the spot, I have no idea what we're going to get into here. What was the story? What's the story that you tell? Or what, in this example, did you tell? Hopefully it's relevant in a public audience here, but what was the actual story?
Yeah, the big story was actually focusing on how a head of sales enablement, just like them, was using Chorus to really drive onboarding for their new hires and really get them to think through, hey, it's not your ability to use playlists like this or be able to have call libraries for your new reps, but really to help them think through, hey, when you're starting to implement this, you have to really think through A, B, and C. And a similar customer of yours, without naming them in this situation, had a chance to do that. And I'll tell you why I'm not naming them. the reason why I'm not naming them is because what I did subsequently to that, instead of just using it as social proof, the next thing I did in an evaluation process was actually their customer reference was that exact same person. And so putting, vision to reality for them to really dig into, hey, how are you using Chorus? How did this save you time here? And what impact did that make on your new hire onboarding? They actually messaged me after and they said, for the record, it was your reference who gave the final push to choose Chorus. It is all predicated on customer storytelling, not just we have this and they have that.
They told the story. I love it. I love it. Devin, I should have kicked off today with you. I mean, this is no offense, Doug. I didn't mean it that way, but it's great to get right from being in the action.
Let me highlight a couple of things that I noticed that Devin is anchoring around, even though we didn't fully get the story itself. We got a lot of pieces to it, but again, the human brain, when you get the right pieces, we're going to fill in the details themselves, because that's just how we function as a brain. But it's interesting because one of the things we do well with stories that I know Devin does is it creates contrast. Here's your world before Chorus. Here's their world after Chorus. Contrast is a really, really powerful tool in the world of telling stories, and because it's painting a picture of what life could be like, if they actually made a different decision. And that contrast also creates some more emotion, because there's a turning point. There's like, oh, here's how bad your life sucks without a platform like ours. Here's how great it could be, right? So there's like, oh man, I want that. I want to experience that.
Well, maybe Devin, stick with us for a second. Let's try a lightning round here. There's going to be uncomfortable, but we're storytelling. So last 24 hours, what's a story?
What's the story?
Yeah, no, what's the story in the last 24 hours?
Give us for any of us, we'll all share. What's something relevant in our business, whatever, what's a story that would help to understand something? Doug, do you want to jump in there?
Yeah, sure. So 3 months ago, I moved to Los Angeles with my wife. We left the Bay Area. I don't know much about the restaurant scene down here. We're still kind of getting a sense of it, largely because it's really difficult to go out to eat because of this whole pandemic that we're in. I was meeting with an SVP of sales candidate last night, and he's from the area and made a recommendation to this restaurant up in the mountains, because we're here in the Palisades. And it was called the Saddle Peak Ranch, and it was like the most hardcore game. I felt like I was in like a hunting. I felt like I was in Africa, and we had just gone out hunting. They're known for their gamey meats, and so of course we had to get the trio of game, and it was like emu, elk, and some other piece of meat, and that was dinner, and it was awesome and amazing, and something that I had never thought I would actually experience in LA in my first 3 months. That was just last night.
I love it. Well, I can feel I'm hungry after hearing that story. Devin, I can go or you can go. Do you have a story?
I'm gonna have you go first on that, and I'm gonna sit on this a little bit.
The thing that just comes to mind, we're just telling stories. We were closing out the quarter, and we've been remote. I joined Chorus back in March. I haven't met the full team. I've only met a few people in person. That's how it should be during this pandemic, and we're a spread out company. So I joined March 16th. I've been remote on Zoom with my leadership team and others. And I happened to invite one leader over to my house, and it happened to be the last day of the quarter. So that's kind of a coincidence. And I'd worked with this leader in the past back in my prior company. So I said, oh, why don't you come on up and we'll talk about, messaging and different pieces that we're going through. Well, that led to, hey, why don't we have the CRO, Tiago, our new CRO, join? You guys haven't met in person in a while. And then that led to, why don't we have our head of product and engineering come so we can put these pieces together. And then that led to, as we were watching the quarter close, which is an exciting period, oh my gosh, we should get, someone that's on the finance side doing all the contracts to come join us and celebrate over a beer. And next thing you know, we've got, 5 of us in Adirondack chairs, a nice bottle of wine, heat lamp, globe lights in a yard where this isn't how we meet. This is not how I've done my career. And it was the absolute highlight of my 7 months of being at Chorus, and maybe highlight beyond that of just a great group of beginnings of an iconic team coming together. And it's just like one of those moments where you're like, this is why we do it. It's not for the destination. It's the journey. It's the journey of building these companies and solving problems that just reminded me that this is it. Like, it's not about where all this stuff goes. This is the moment we live for. I'll be so sad when these moments go away. So that's the story that comes to mind for me from last week.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I'm going to actually tell you a story about something that happened to me recently, professionally. Jim, as you know, I moved recently from an individual contributor role to a leadership role here at Chorus. Thanks, Doug. And this was probably one of the moments that really really opened my eyes and why I'm passionate about managing and helping others. It's the last month of the quarter, taking over as a new manager. That's a big responsibility, especially when you think about, all I was thinking about previously were all of my deals that were set to close. Now I have to worry about 4 other people. And so really taking that over and understanding, hey, I'm not going to be able to really be in every single thing. How can I make the biggest impact with the smallest tweaks? That was my biggest focus. And I had this one rep on my team. She's a superstar, Cora Graham. Very good. And Cora was carrying the load for the team in terms of pipeline. And frankly, she was overwhelmed. And one of the things I was really trying to focus on with her is helping her get rid of the monotonous tasks that are, just spending too much time on, and really focusing on the little things that are going to drive your deals. So for Cora, it was a really fun experience to actually work with her over the last few weeks of the quarter to really focus on the true north. And she actually had her biggest quarter ever as a rep here at Chorus. And it was a rewarding feeling as a manager, moving from the IC role to see yourself be successful, but then also a more rewarding feeling to actually be able to help somebody else get through their goals.
Well, this is awesome. Fun. This is maybe every time we meet, we need to be meeting this way.
Yeah.
I have no idea how this is responding to everybody else listening, but sure fun to be with the 3 of you.
So can I highlight a couple things here? Number one, by the way, it's a great exercise in your team meetings. Just everybody start with a story over the last 24 hours, personal or professional. Because part of it is it also helps to kind of train the brain on, what storytelling really is. One of the things that I think you might notice from all 3 of our stories is there's a couple of elements that are crucial to storytelling and becoming better at it. Number one, we all had a setting, a time and a place, right, over the last 24 hours. For me, it was last night. For you, Jim, it was last day of the quarter. For you, it was it just recently? Oh, it was the end of the month, right? So Devin, we all had a setting with a time and a place. We all had a character or characters. For me, my character was me. Jim, for you, you had a series of characters. Yeah. Devin, you had one character. So, but by the way, companies are not characters. Just remember that. Quit talking about your customers. You're like Cisco and everybody else, Zoom, whoever your customers are, and identify the people in those companies, because those are the people that we can relate to. You'll notice all of us were using people in our narratives and not companies as characters. And then at the end of the day, there was a turning point, and then there was an outcome. So that's just simple narrative framework right there. And we all followed it. And it worked.
It's interesting how it's so easy to stay engaged when you're telling the story. Even Doug, just about the restaurant, you stay engaged versus when you're giving advice to people or just giving them stats. I wanted to end on one last stat here. Speaking of stats.
Speaking of stats.
Now I got to come up with the story. But when we use social proof, the one last area our research team had pulled was just looking at the use of social proof across the sales cycle. So from first call to second call, third call. And what we've noticed is that there's the most amount of social proof used in the first call, the discovery call. But we also need stories and social proof all the way through the cycle. I'm curious about discovery calls. How do we use, what's the stories? How do you lead discovery with stories? And how do you balance that talk track?
Well, I have an opinion about that, as you can imagine.
Let's hear it.
Not surprising. I think, first of all, we need to get rid of this idea of discovery, because the moment we say this is a discovery call, all of a sudden it feels like it's the Spanish Inquisition, and I'm just going to go through a checklist of questions that I need to ask you. And as a buyer, as a recipient of that on the other end, it's like, good Lord, when is this going to end? So honestly, I think at the end of the day, we need to be having a business conversation. And in a business conversation, we're trying to identify why would you ever want to change what you're doing and why does it make sense to do it right now? And in that conversation, I'm going to use examples of other companies that were in a similar position and they realized maybe from that position that there was a lot more to be gained or a lot more to lose if they didn't actually do something different. Right. So I'm going to use examples of other companies that were in a similar situation to show, what their journey was all about and what the outcome was.
It makes a ton of sense. You just retain so much more when you tell it that way of other people's. You open this up talking about someone at Coca-Cola. Was it Pam or somebody?
Yeah, Sue, mid-level manager at Coca-Cola.
Yeah, but I mean, I remember, Pam, Sue, but
yeah.
The story of just how you connect their pain. You can feel their world, their role. You can see what their desk looks like.
Yeah.
That's what this is about.
Yeah, it is. That's why it's also so important to know the personas in which who you speak to on a regular basis. Know everything you can about that persona so that you can start to connect narratives and stories to them and to that persona. Because again, it's all about making sure that that story is relevant to the audience. So the more we know about those people, the easier it is for us to connect, that story.
For me, final story on my side. My last company, I was CEO at Apollo, a Y Combinator company, and I joined. First time CEO joining, and they had Chorus. And that's how I got introduced to Chorus. And I was able to listen to all of the different sales interactions in the first 36 hours, which normally I would have had to get out in the field and join the calls. And I did that too. But I listened to so many that by the end of day 4, I had more stories like I'd worked at that company for years. I mean, I could tell the story of Joe and the finance company down the street. And I thought that was the game-changing moment of, I actually have stories. I wasn't there, but because I can watch it and see it and view it and hear their questions, that was the magical moment of, I got stories, and stories help people to understand what we all do.
Amen.
Devin, any final comments or thoughts, or are you good?
No, I think storytelling is just extremely powerful, not even just in a business setting. When you think about how you even interact with your friends, one of the first things that you do is catch up and you tell stories and you tell your own personal.
What we do, right?
Yeah, exactly. And it's just human nature. It's nothing different from what you do. However, Doug does a really good job of taking that concept and how people think and apply that to business. So really appreciate all of the trainings that you've done for us, Doug. It's made a big impact for me in my sales process.
Awesome.
Doug,
Well,
parting words or story for folks listening as we
funny story actually about how I got connected to Chorus. So Chorus used to be a company called Effect Layer. And Roy, founder and CEO at the time, was trying to sell to me when I was at Box. And he showed up like 20 minutes late for our meeting. And at that point, I was kind of over it. I was like, I had already met Amit from Gong, ironically enough, when he was still in Israel. And there's a couple other companies already doing this. So I was like, Roy, I don't really have time for you. I need to go catch the train to get home. And he's like, wait a minute, where's your house? And I'm in San Francisco. And he's like, well, I'm actually driving that way. How about I give you a ride to your house? And that way we can catch up and basically have our meeting. And I thought to myself, I'm like, oh man, I'm going to be trapped in a car with someone that's trying to pitch to me for the next 45 minutes. Not only that, on the way home, he's like, oh, hate to do this, but I got to pull over and get some gas. I'm like, oh man, Roy, you're killing me here. And it was a really, really, I tell you, it was a great move on his part to actually make the call. I learned a ton. Even though I was a little frustrated, it was actually a better experience to get home. And then fast forward. So at the end, I was like, great, keep me in the loop as to like how you're progressing. I think this makes a ton of sense. I need to understand the technology a little bit more. Fast forward, I leave Box and I go to Emergence Capital, and I have a meeting on my calendar to meet with this guy, Roy, from a company called Chorus, who's one of our portfolio companies. And I sit down and I meet with him, and I'm like, wait a minute, hold on a second. We met like a year and a half ago. What? I don't understand. He's like, yep, a lot's changed. And now we get to work together just like I had hoped a year and a half ago. So fun little journey on how Chorus and I became super well connected.
I love it. Well, shout out to Roy, who's going to hear that story. That's awesome. Hey, Doug, Devin, thank you for joining today on the Weekly Briefing. Everybody can get this content on Chorus.ai, and wish you both a great rest of the day.
Thanks so much, Jim. Thanks, Doug.
Cheers, guys.
Thanks,
Bye.
Jim. See you, Devin.